For this presentation, we will be discussing Viktor Frankl's existential theory. First, we must find out what is existential theory. Existential theory is a centuries-old philosophy. It embraces personal freedom and choice. It purports that humans choose their own existence and meaning. European philosopher Soren Kierkegaard is thought to be one of the first philosophers of existential theory. It is concerned with people's perceptions of their place in the world and the definition of what it is to be alive. It is also devoted to approaching these issues with an open mind and a sense of wonder. Rather than dogmatic approach, the goal is to find the truth with an open mind and a sense of wonder, not to fit the client into predetermined categories and interpretations. Human nature, according to the existential perspective, is open-ended, adaptable, and capable of a wide range of experiences. The human is in perpetual state of transformation. As I exist, I construct myself. There is no such thing as an essential, concrete self or a predetermined definition of one's personality or abilities. The person behind this theory is Viktor Emil Frankl, an Austrian psychologist. Viktor Emil Frankl was born in Vienna, Austria in 1905. During his adolescent years, Frankl had decided to pursue a career as a medical professional. In the years to follow, Frankl attended the same Viennese secondary school as had Sigmund Freud years earlier. This was Frankl became intrigued with the psychological principles of Freudian psychoanalysis and began corresponding with Freud. However, Frankl's fascination soon faded and he departed from Freudianism, claiming Freud's thinking was too dogmatic and reductionist to explain the whole human behavior. In the late 1920s, Frankl became devoted to Adlerian publishing and lecturing on the principles of individual psychology for several years. Frankl graduated from the University of Vienna's medical school in 1930, specializing in neurology and psychiatry. The basis of Frankl's theory was that the primary motivation of an individual is to search for meaning in life, and the primary purpose of psychotherapy should be to help the individual find the meaning. He died on September 2, 1997.
Concentration camps are for political prisoners and members of national or minority groups who are imprisoned for purposes of state security, exploitation, or punishment, generally by presidential decree or military command. In 1942, Frankl was put in concentration camp with his first wife and mother, but were murdered in the span of days in camp. Frankl drug ditches, set up a suicide prevention program, and volunteered at the typhus ward. During his camp or imprisonment, he was able to find ways to find meaning in life and later on made manuscript for his book, also his way to distract himself to stay awake. Frankl were able to publish his best-selling book, Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, Frankl details his time spent as a Nazi concentration camp prisoner and reflects on how one can find meaning in life, even in the harshest of conditions. Logotherapy is a therapeutic approach that helps people find personal meaning in life. It's a form of psychotherapy that is focused on the future and on our ability to endure hardship and suffering through a search for purpose. Furthermore, logotherapy is often subsumed under the headings of humanistic psychology, existential psychology. Logotherapy comes from the Greek word logos, that translates as meaning, a therapy which is defined as the treatment of a condition, illness, or maladjustment. Humans are motivated by something called a will to meaning, which is the need to find purpose in life. According to Frankl, he argued that life can have meaning even in the most miserable of circumstances, and that the motivation for living comes from finding that meaning.
Logotherapy or discovering meaning. Logotherapy is composed of three basic principles. Logotherapy focuses on the future aspects of a patient's life, more specifically the meaning that one intends to fulfill. Logos is the Greek word which means meaning. Hence, logotherapy focuses on a person's search for meaning. The first basic principle is that life has meaning in all circumstances, even despondent ones. The second basic principle is that the main motivational force is a desire to find meaning in life. The third basic principle states that humanity has the freedom of attitudinal choice, even in situations of unchangeable affliction. Originally, logotherapy was called height psychology in response to the Freudian concept of depth psychology. Depth psychology focused on insights from the natural and unconscious processes within a person. But height psychology promoted the idea that people could transcend these natural processes. Frankl clarifies that this search for meaning does not have any relation to spirituality or religion, but strictly relates to finding purpose in one's life or task. Moreover, logotherapists do not prescribe meaning to a patient but rather describe the process of how meaning is obtained in hopes of providing the patient with a sense of fulfillment. There are three techniques used in logotherapy. First, the reflection. The reflection is aimed to helping you focus away from yourself and toward other people, allowing you to become whole and to spend less time feeling preoccupied with a problem or worry. This technique is meant to combat hyper-reflection or extreme focus on an anxiety-provoking situation or object. Hyper-reflection is often common in people with anticipatory anxiety. The reflection puts a stop or applies the brake to pathological hyperintention. The reflection is not a denial or a distraction. It is a radical reorientation. Clinically, the reflection is employed when a problem is caused for the patient by too much reflection or thinking or by paying too much attention to solving a problem. The human person is not a closed system, but one open to the world and to meanings to fulfill. The reflection is the attitudinal decision to turn from negative or obsessive or excessive self-preoccupations, psychological conflicts, complexes and concerns, and neurotic symptoms toward positive and meaningful feelings, thoughts, and actions. The second technique is called the paradoxical intention. Paradoxical intention is a technique that invites you to wish for the thing you fear the most. This was originally suggested for use in the case of anxiety or phobias, in which humor and ridicule can be used when fear is paralyzing. Paradoxical intention is an easy-to-understand method, can be applied by anyone without necessitating a therapist or physician with practice, and consists of a few key elements. Paradoxical intention is the oldest of Dr. Viktor Frankl's treatment techniques. Frankl utilized paradox for the basis of a psychological technique to help people suffering from a number of symptoms ranging from stuttering and sexual dysfunctions to insomnia, phobias, anxiety, and panic attacks. He speaks of neuroses. In other words, all those things that are not physiological or biological. They have their own origin in our minds. For example, if you have a fear of looking foolish, you might be encouraged to try and look foolish on purpose. Paradoxically, your fear would be removed when you set an intention to behave as foolishly as possible. The third technique and the last one is Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue is a tool used to help you through the process of self-discovery by noticing and interpreting your own words. During Socratic dialogue, your therapist listens closely to the way you describe things and points out your word patterns, helping you to see the meaning in them. This process is believed to help you realize your own answers. Often, these are already presented within you and are just waiting to be discovered.
We have two existential ideas. Noological dimension is derived from the Greek word nous, denoting mind or spirit. Specifically, the noological dimension refers to anything pertaining to only the human dimension or humanity's quest for meaning. The neurological dimension is considered to be the realm of human consciousness, responsibility, and is the locus of freedom. Frankl claimed that the animals consist of only the biological and psychological dimensions because they are unable to harness the power of self-transcendence. Hence, Frankl asserts that the psychological is reserved for instinctual behaviors. Next, we have existential frustration. A person's will to meaning can become frustrated. Frankl coined the term existential frustration to explain this phenomenon of misdirected meaning. Existential frustration can occur from prolonged periods of boredom and apathy. Frankl utilizes the metaphor of an existential vacuum to explain frustrated meaning. Now, let's watch this short clip about finding meaning in suffering.
What does suffering mean to you? For Viktor Frankl and other unfortunate souls, it meant being imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps. These camps were disgusting places full of torture, pain, and suffering. Chances of surviving were at most 1 in 28. Prisoners found themselves rejoicing at the sight of a few peas in an otherwise watery bowl of soup. If that's the happiest part of someone's day, it says a lot about how much they're suffering. Prisoners often worried about the well-being of their family and friends who had been separated from them. It's hard to even imagine the suffering that the prisoners went through. Amidst their suffering, many prisoners contemplated and many performed suicide by running into the electric fences. These prisoners ceased to have hope. They saw no future for themselves. They felt that their lives had become meaningless and they had lost the will to live. On the other hand, some prisoners, like Viktor, were able to find meaning in their suffering. In a world where people will commonly say, "Why me?" whenever something bad happens, I wanted to find out how someone could persevere through one of the darkest periods in humankind and find an answer to that question for themselves. Prior to World War II, essentialism was a fairly standard belief. This was the idea that we are born with an essence. An essence can be considered as a part of a person or thing that defines them. Without that defining quality, they would no longer be that thing. For example, the specific sperm and egg that made me are a part of my essence. If it were a different sperm or a different egg, I would no longer be me. Some philosophers believe that as a part of our essence, we were born with a purpose. The atrocities witnessed during World War II really made humanity question this. It's understandable to question whether life really has a predestined meaning if all someone experiences is suffering. After World War II, the concept of existentialism became much more widespread. Existentialism is the idea that we are born without a purpose and that we are left to define our own. This is often stated as existence precedes essence. We are born first into a meaningless world and then we define our own meaning. Some people think that existentialism is a depressing view of the world because it says the world has no ultimate and objective meaning. Others disagree. They may see it as a beautiful and liberating philosophy, one that allows them to find a potentially infinite amount of meaning in the world and gives them the freedom to define that for themselves. Every second, every minute, and every hour of every day they have the ability to define a new meaning for themselves, a new reason to live. Existentialism was the key philosophy that allowed Viktor Frankl to find meaning in his suffering during his time in concentration camps. To quote him, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, just think of an incurable disease such as inoperable cancer, we are challenged to change ourselves." Existentialists have the ability to take an adversity and overcome it, or empower themselves by giving it meaning. As circumstances change, they give themselves the freedom to change their meanings and attitude. They don't ask life what its meaning is, but they're constantly being asked by life. How they choose to live is their answer. Frankl argues that humans do not seek attentionless state. In fact, attentionless state can result in another problem that Viktor called the existential vacuum, a complete lack of purpose or meaninglessness in life. Viktor argues that it's within this vacuum that depression, aggression, and addiction can arise. I believe that Viktor would argue that in order to overcome this dilemma, a certain amount of tension is required, but this tension must be worth overcoming for the individual. So it's not about avoiding suffering or stress at all costs, but finding meaning in suffering or finding something worth suffering for. I think this quote by Viktor beautifully summarizes the key takeaway. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Think of someone being cut off in rush hour traffic. In between the impulse, them being cut off, and the reaction, there's a space. In this space, they have the ability to choose the reaction to that impulse. In the same way, there's a space between our suffering and our reaction to it. We have the ability to choose our reaction and give new meaning to our suffering. In a way, we become worthy of our suffering.
Okay, for our interactive discussion, here's a question that most of us question ourselves. What is the meaning of life? You guys can answer this on your own, okay? But now, we'll answer this one. If life has no inherent meaning, and if it's up to us to give life its meaning, how exactly do we do that? According to Viktor Frankl, there are 3 ways of giving your life meaning. Number 1 is work. When Viktor Frankl reached the Auschwitz concentration camp, all of his belongings were seized. He had a manuscript with him, and that was taken away from him as well. Now, this manuscript was really important to him because it basically contained his life's work. So in the concentration camp, he used his work to give his life meaning. Number 2 is love. Love is the second way of giving your life meaning. When we talk about love, we're not just talking about romantic love that you see in the movies. But the kind of love that gives your life meaning is the kind where you see the other person's potential and you help them become the best version of themselves. The third way of making your life meaningful is suffering. There is no guarantee that we will find the kind of work we want to do or find love, but suffering is almost guaranteed for. In one way or another, almost everybody, to various degrees, will suffer in life. When Viktor Frankl was suffering in the concentration camps, he would imagine himself standing in a lecture room and teaching his students about his experiences. Because of this found meaning, he was able to transcend his suffering, and his suffering became more meaningful. When you're able to give your suffering a meaning, it becomes more bearable. Now let's have Lyza to discuss the quote below.
The quote we have for this presentation goes like, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." Viktor E. Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. It speaks to a fact that meaning is not found in circumstances but rather in the pursuit of objects, people, or activities that an individual finds purpose in. Knowing your purpose of existence can help you solve different circumstances that life has and will offer you. This quote sums up the whole book and logotherapy. If you know why your life is important and you know that your goal is a positive one, you can suffer through almost any defeat without giving up or quitting.
Lastly, we have this discussion. Frankl didn't believe in the idea of delusional optimism in the face of reality. He said that having a strong mental frame is vital. His view contradicts other psychoanalytic viewpoints. Example like Freud, who believes in the will of pleasure, and Adler, who believes in the will of power. Frankl observes that the meaning of life differs from the person to person, situation to situation. As a result, he claims that there is no fundamental meaning in life for all of mankind, but rather an idiosyncratic meaning that develops at each given time. And that would be all for our group Existential Theory by Viktor Frankl. Thank you.